Cleveland Browns get their 10th win of the season, defeating the Houston Texans 36-22. Score certainly wasn't that close, but this was an important win for the Browns and puts them on the doorstep for the postseason. Bree is out this week. She's on vacation for Christmas. I hope she has a wonderful holiday. But here we are. Christmas, and the Browns already have 10 wins on the season. Let's not understate that. Coming into the season, that was the goal. Coming in, everybody felt like getting to 10 wins was the benchmark they had to have to secure themselves a spot in the playoffs. And they are not technically in, though they could theoretically back their win in if they had to. But still, 10-5, they've still got an opportunity to go 12-5, which is incredible to think about. Coming into the year, I predicted a healthy Browns team would go 10-7. And here we are, and the Browns are anything but healthy. And now 10-7 is the worst case scenario. Just weird how things played out, but it's a credit to everything this team has done this season. And, it's been fascinating to watch because week in and week out, you've seen this team sort of outplay their fans' faith, outplay the media expectations and everything else, and they just don't care. They'll just play until they win. And this game was a great example of that. This game was great on a number of levels because it answered a lot of questions that we've had. Could the Browns defense travel and play well on the road? Could they get more consistency on the offensive side of the ball? Could they just win going away against an opponent? They haven't really been able to do that. And those are a lot of questions they answered. They also proposed some new questions we didn't know we had, which I will get into. But this was the Joe Flacco, Amari Cooper game, certainly more Amari Cooper than Joe Flacco. But look, this was Joe Flacco has been the biggest story in Cleveland since he signed with the team and started playing quarterback. He's been here 5 weeks. He's already thrown for 1,000 yards. He's got 10 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He's likable. His teammates love him. The media fawns over him. You can watch them sort of like melting in front of him. He just has this aura, even though he doesn't really carry himself in a way that sort of would suggest he thinks he's better than anyone or anything like that. He's a humble guy. He's very sort of self-contained, but he does have a presence about him that sort of inspires confidence in people around him, or at least that is what we've seen. And for 3 games, he was very average. And I know people were screaming at me for saying this, but like he was very average. He would make plays. Certainly we saw first drive touchdowns we haven't seen all season. We saw a number of things we haven't really seen much this year. But allowing the Browns to score some points and put up some big plays and things. But it would always come at the cost of the offense and Joe Flacco being a big part of that, of helping the other team stay in the game. The Los Angeles Rams, he throws he forces that really bad ball, trying to go to Elijah Moore, that results in the interception. Jacksonville, the Browns are poised to take total control of that game. They're up 14-0. He throws that interception on the slant, and the Jags stay in the game. And that's just been sort of the trick. And then 3/4 of the Bears game was horrific in a lot of ways. But then he has the spectacular fourth quarter where he was genuinely outstanding, and the Browns win that game. This game was not like those. Certainly he had the 2 interceptions, and they feel minimal at best. But this was sort of the Joe Flacco at the upper echelon of what Joe Flacco can be for this team. He was feeling it early. He was hot. He was able to make a number of big throws throughout this game. And it started from the first play of the game, going 53 yards down the field to Amari Cooper, which was weirdly may have been one of his worst throws relative to the highlights he made. Because if he threw that a little bit farther, I think Amari Cooper might have scored. But it set the Browns up on the doorstep. They go in and score, and they go from there. But like Joe Flacco got better from that play. And he put Amari Cooper in position consistently to just be a superstar. And Amari Cooper beat the Houston Texans defense in every way imaginable in this game. And certainly there were some things that went against the Houston Texans on this. Jonathan Greenard going out almost immediately was a huge break for the Browns. They were already down Will Anderson. Those were their top two defensive ends. Certainly made things a little bit easier for the Browns, but look, for a team like the Browns who have been dealing with so many injuries, they certainly weren't going to complain. But Amari Cooper beat the Texans defense in every way you could basically draw up. Like Amari Cooper won with strength. He won with his speed. He won with size. He won with good body position. He ran polished routes. He won with nuance. He just did all the little things well. You watch the routes on some of those, like the touchdowns or some of those big plays or sideline throws or most everything. And there was the attention to detail was just spectacular. He checked all the boxes on some of these things. From the first play of the game, using his body to keep the corner away from even being able to make a play on the ball after just running by the safety. On the 75-yard touchdown, he runs a double move against a backup corner, and then uses his body really well, and he's just too strong as the DB, like basically desperately has to try to grab on, hoping for maybe to get away with something, but at worst, getting defensive pass interference. And Amari Cooper shrugged him off like a child. And then what was it fascinating to me is watching him. He catches the ball, he pulls it down with that one hand. He looked like vintage Jim Brown rumbling into the end zone at first. Just the way he held the ball out like that. And that play was great because Joe Flacco, they roll play action. And this was another game where I think the Browns did a really creative job coming up with answers for pass protection, using play action pass protection to really help them out, give their tackles help, and space things a little bit better so that Flacco had space. He rolls to his left. He clearly sees a wide open David Njoku running a crosser into the sideline and just is like, nope, I'm gonna go deep. And Cooper had space, he had separation, and then the ball was spectacular. Allowed Cooper to go up and make a play on it, and they get the 75-yard touchdown. And like at that point, I don't think there was anything that was going to stop Flacco. Initially, it seemed like Flacco was trying to be a little more cautious with some of his throws. There were a couple of plays early in the game on third downs where it seemed like, when he threw like to Kareem Hunt, where I'm not really sure like he threw it to Kareem Hunt, where it felt like he was sort of just trying to get out of the drive and move on, just trying to protect the ball, which is, given the way the Browns defense is playing, makes all the sense in the world. Just don't turn it over, because that's the only way the opponent was able to put up points in some of these games. And then once he started feeling it, he just started going for it. And one of the things that's sort of endearing and frustrating about Flacco is that he has total trust in his receivers. When he diagnoses the play a certain way, he's going to throw it. And when that's wrong, you see things like the interception on the slant, or throwing that ball at Elijah Moore that went nowhere. Some of these other throws, or against the Bears, the interception that was on Cedric Tillman for not making the right read. Flacco trusted that he would, threw the ball there, and it became an easy interception for Eddie Jackson. That's not Flacco's fault, but it is sort of what he does. What it also allows him to do is the ball is on time. It's there where you want it to be. So, against the Bears, when they were trying to drive down late in the game, there was like a post that Amari Cooper was going to run, and he sticks his foot in the ground and the ball like whizzes by his head, because Flacco diagnosed it and thought, this was going to be there. He throws it. Amari Cooper sort of read it just slightly differently, and they were just a tick off. But when Flacco sees it, he's going to throw it. And that paid off really, really well on the touchdown pass, the second touchdown pass to Amari Cooper on the post. Cooper is lined up in the slot. He runs directly at Derek Stingley, who's a hell of a corner for the Texans, almost steps on his feet before sticking his foot in the ground to set up the post route. And as he turns inside, the ball is like on him immediately. It gave Stingley no chance to really recover. It was a great ball in the right spot. It allowed Cooper to reach out with his hands and make the catch. And then he used his body to sort of turn away from the defender and left Stingley only basically wrapped around Cooper's body. So there were just these plays that you've seen from Flacco that are really difficult to pull off because he has such good timing and understands what he's looking at to a point where he is going to have the ball out right where it's supposed to be. He trusts his guys implicitly. And it's been really interesting because it's not like, I know a lot of this has been, well, he's got a great connection with Amari Cooper. He had a great connection with Elijah Moore against the Rams. He had a great connection for 2 weeks with David Njoku. It's just how he plays. He has a great connection with Cedric Tillman because he just throws the ball in a way that allows guys to make plays. And like there's this volatility with it. We've seen guys play this style before. I think the most comparable guy in Browns recent history would be Josh McCown. And Josh McCown, one, isn't as good as Joe Flacco, but he had that same level of arm talent and belief in his guys. He would just throw the ball up and let guys make plays. It would also result in interceptions. And you'd get this like predictable stat line of sort of like, you knew Josh McCown was going to basically throw for like 250, 2 touchdowns and 3 picks or something right around that. And Flacco's a little bit better. I mean, he's averaging a ridiculous like 328 yards per game or something. He's got 10 touchdowns and 7 picks in 4 games. Like you extend that over the course of the season, Flacco would be in a 17-game season on the track he's on would throw for like 5,500 yards, 40 some odd, I think 41 touchdowns and like 30 interceptions. It's, I think part of it plays into why people are so passionate about Flacco. He allows you to send disbelief in the best possible way, that he sort of, anything is possible because of the way he plays, which is great. Obviously, the flip side of that is that there are people who are very protective of Flacco to the point where if you point out that he's again for 3 games was largely average at best, will look at you like you have 3 heads. This was the game where Flacco was genuinely outstanding, and the picks are meaningless. I mean, the throw he made to a Marquise Goodwin that was intercepted felt like a heat check. It felt like a guy who had made 3 shots in a row and was like, he's feeling it. I'm going to take this shot. And it wasn't like it was necessarily a bad gamble. It wasn't a poor read or anything like that. It just felt like a guy who was like, I've got this going. I'm gonna go see if I can make another play. And then the interception before the half, we can sort of quibble with it, I guess, but it was just that weird circumstance of not having the kicker. And I'll get to that. But the other part of this that sort of gets lost in Flacco's day, or really Cooper's day, was that like obviously Amari Cooper has 265 yards, incredible performance, historic. He sets all kinds of records, both franchise in terms of the most receiving yards in a game. Obviously breaking Josh Gordon's record, the first receiver for 1,000 yards in back-to-back seasons, which really painful. Like that hurts so much. And it was not surprising to me that Kevin Stefanski was genuinely stunned when he found that out ahead of this game, that hadn't been done, because, functioning franchises don't have this problem, waiting 30 years to sort of figure out how to make the forward pass work. He's the first, one of, I think, 3 players at the TO and Randy Moss to have like 200 some yards with 3 different teams, just all these accolades. And those are all impressive. Certainly well-deserved for a guy who just doesn't seek a whole lot of adoration. He's not sort of, he's not the guy going out there, what about me? Or, why don't I get mine? It was interesting to watch the Pittsburgh Steelers game where George Pickens goes off and has a great game. and him having to pose for the camera and basically talk about, signal to all the haters or whatever. And that's not a criticism of Pickens, although, if things go badly, that will inevitably be a callback that people will go to. There any number of players do that, and it's whatever. But it stands out simply because Cooper doesn't. He's just very low key in terms of how he operates, and he has a lot. He has a lot of similarities to Kevin Stefanski in that regard. Like Kevin Stefanski getting really excited is something that's become something people genuinely enjoy because they just like him getting out of his element and being able to show emotion and stuff. Amari Cooper is absolutely in that same tier in terms of that. Like when the Browns beat the San Francisco 49ers and Cooper had a monster day, he had 100 and some odd yards. Like you got that one little clip of him on social media talking how big this was. You don't get a whole lot of that from Amari Cooper. He's just very buttoned up. You got a little bit of that in the post game. He got to talk to his teammates and stuff, and you get to you get to see his passion in that. When you listen to him in press conference, he's very introspective. He's very thoughtful. He gives good answers, but it's just he's just very deliberate in how he goes. Anyway, he goes for the 265, and you sort of get lost in the fact that David Njoku had another good game. Wasn't as incredible as the previous 2 weeks, but it was just another solid game where he caught all the balls thrown at him. Flacco makes a tremendous throw on that little out and up. They move the safety out of the way as Njoku sells outside, and then he shoots up the middle of the field behind the linebacker. Again, Flacco sees it, throws the ball right on time. The defense has almost no chance to adjust. Njoku makes the catch sort of in traffic and gets another touchdown, his fourth in 3 weeks, which has been obviously great for him. I think he had about 44 yards or something on the day. It wasn't like a spectacular day, but it just continues a strong trend of games for him in the right direction. So that's another good element of what we're seeing on the offensive side of the ball. Certainly, the running game continues to be a nightmare. Some of this is, and Jake Burns has done a really good job of this on film breakdowns and stuff over at the OBR, looking at like how often it seems like one player is the difference between a big run and no gain. And certainly there are some limitations at running back. I think Jerome Ford is better than gets credit for, but he's not Nick Chubb. He's not, he's never going to be, but he's a perfect number 2 back to a guy like Nick Chubb. He's somebody that can produce for you, but he's largely going to get what is blocked for him. Maybe he'll give you a little bit more, can do some things in the passing game that are interesting. Still a young player. Maybe he can get better. But like largely you get what you block for him. Similarly, Pierce Strong is really exciting in that he's so fast, he's so explosive, but it just seems like the second somebody touches him, he falls to the ground, which is a shame because there are so many plays where it seems like he's one guy away from breaking a big play. But unfortunately, when you never get past that one guy, that's a difficult way to operate. I mean, he can make guys miss sort of with speed and agility, but he doesn't really deal well with contact. I still think he's a useful component on this team, certainly has value on special teams. And as that third running back, he's useful. It's just difficult when you want the Browns to be able to find something on the ground, something to just allow the Browns to run clock. It's becoming a situation where it's reminiscent of Deshaun Watson when he was with the Houston Texans, and they were in the playoffs, got up to a huge lead against the Kansas City Chiefs, and they had no running game. They could not run it at all. And so they couldn't run clock to just shorten the game. And by virtue of having to throw it constantly and not be able to or run it and just fail, they couldn't sustain drives, which gave Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And the Chiefs came back and were able to chip away at the lead until they came back and won it. And that is a serious concern. Now the Browns have a better defense than what the Texans had that particular year, but nevertheless, that becomes a real challenge when you don't have as much breathing room. If the Browns only have a 10-point lead as opposed to a four-score lead, how can they sort of milk away the clock? I mean, when the Browns went to the playoffs in 2020, you got to the fourth quarter with a lead and you knew Nick Chubb was going to close it. Like he was the closer. He got in there. The combination of him and Kareem Hunt allowed them to just put teams away. They had a tremendous four-minute offense, and were just able to do this. I mean, part of the Browns' success is the fact that they have to come back. Their offense is geared to come back from deficits because they have to throw so much. How can they manage lead? Now, certainly you don't. I mean, if you have your choice, you're going to take a lead, particularly a two-score lead, um, late in the game. But that is something that is of concern. That is something they're going to have to figure out a way to. Man, I mean, that's the biggest. That is certainly the biggest challenge on offense these last couple weeks. Meanwhile, the Browns are doing a lot of interesting things, I think, in the screen game. They're just not clicking quite the way that you'd like. They've been close on a lot of them. They've been just a hair off. Like, Flacco and Kareem Hunt couldn't connect on one that seemed like it had some space. David Njoku had caught one where it seemed like he was one man away from having a big game. Elijah Moore got hit on a wide receiver screen that didn't go anywhere. Jerome Ford dropped one that seemed like there was some space. Like, that is a way for the Browns to sort of navigate some of their rushing issues, and has been a way for them to create spacing in the past. That would certainly help. That would certainly create some problems for the defense. Now, the flip side of that is doing all those things has kept the defense honest in terms of spacing, and it has allowed Joe Flacco to go deep and throw some of these deep balls, because even as teams are coming in basically expecting Flacco to go for the long ball, they're still in any number of situations running defenses or like man or some cover four stuff where you're still ending up with isolated receivers on one DB, cover three quite a bit in this game, where you can still find your way to getting that one-on-one down the field. So it's a frustrating element that is not clicking quite right, but it is still having an impact. So those are the things offensively that you want to see, a little bit, better as we move into these last couple weeks, and potentially, obviously in the postseason. We're still waiting, obviously, on the seeding and everything with that. So that becomes another element that the Browns could do. The other thing that's sort of been an interesting wrinkle that we've seen is traditionally the Browns, and they still did this at points in this game, they still load up with a million big tight ends. They'll put extra linemen on the field and should try to create space that way. But more and more, you're seeing the Browns just say, screw it, we're going to space teams out. Or the other option is they will take all their big receivers and use them in condensed formation. So twofold, they're getting smaller defensive personnel groups on the field, while also putting guys like David Bell or Cedric Tillman or some of these guys inside to block or pass protect, as the case may be, to create that bigger size or condensed formation that can potentially create some running rooms or opportunities in the passing game. And particularly in this game, I think condensed formations have been really, really good for Amari Cooper in setting up some of those sideline routes he was running, where he was able to create just a great angle to allow a window for Flacco to throw the ball and hit him, particularly on the play that allowed him to set the record was a good example of this, where he's getting up the field first, then working sort of a flag route type thing. I don't think that's technically what he's running, but it's sort of that concept that creates a little bit of space for him to work to the sideline. That was, that has been something I think that has worked really well for Amari Cooper. Kevin Stefanski has always been a person who really likes to run condensed formations and give him a lot of options in terms of how he wants to run the ball, and then in terms of passing concepts. Having a guy like Amari Cooper be able to line up inside and sort of have the entire field to go to. He can cut across, he can go out, he can go up, whatever. There's just a lot of opportunity there. And even though this really was the Flacco game, there were some interesting wrinkles I saw from Kevin Stefanski. I thought there was a particularly interesting play design where they ran orbit motion with David Bell, and then on the after the snap of the ball, they fake to, I think, Pierre Strong or Jerome Ford, I can't remember which. He flies up the field, and then after all that, they have a late releasing David Njoku on basically a delayed route right behind where Ford was, where that space essentially creates a vacuum where he's potentially the only guy. They throw the ball to Njoku, and it was the Texans were on it. They were smart. They covered it really well. I don't, that's one of those where I think you run that play against other teams or other situations in that game, and that potentially yields a big play. But this wasn't, obviously the Jerome Ford touchdown was interesting. Some of the 2-point stuff they did with DTR was interesting. They ran a lot of interesting plays, but it really didn't. Kevin Stefanski certainly did a good job with the game plan, and his staff and Alex Van Pelt and all those guys did a good job with the game plan. They did a good job with game play calls, but this was certainly Flacco's game in terms of he's just making plays. It wasn't certainly there were things that were schemed open and opportunities that made sense relative to the defense they were facing. Cooper was certainly quick to address that in his post-game presser, but this still came down to Joe Flacco was just a dude making throws that just allowed his receivers and teammates to just shine in the best way possible. And then I know I mentioned Cedric Tillman before. I know he's got a lot to grow in terms of just understanding and gaining knowledge of the game. Man, he does some fun stuff. He's just so big. Flacco early in the game, trying to force a ball to him initially, pulling it down smartly. I don't think that play was there, rolling out, and then finding Tillman by the sideline to extend the drive was a great play. I know that drive didn't ultimately go anywhere, but it was just a really good play. It was always funny because, as somebody who advocated for the Browns to sign Flacco, people were kept insisting he's a statue. As I've talked about on here, the guy had elite defensive end agility coming out of college. And look, he's not that guy anymore, but he's got really light. He's light on his feet. He's got nifty footwork, and he's got the thing that really stands out is his balance. So he doesn't have to be a great athlete necessarily in terms of raw speed, but he can do things that just move enough. Like Dan Marino, as another example, never a great athlete, but he had terrific feet and a good sense of how things worked in a way that you're seeing, I think, some ways in Flacco. Now, Marino was never rolling out a whole lot. He was just sort of able to maneuver in the pocket and, play in that old school, more traditional style of quarterback. But in this new age, there's certain characteristics where you look at how Flacco is able to navigate the pocket, and he's just so light on his feet in a way that his athleticism is sort of understated in that regard, which is good. I mean, it does give you some extra options in terms of some of the plays he was able to make, and you've seen that over the course of some weeks. That rollout he threw to David Njoku for the touchdown last week was extraordinary in terms of the throw, but certainly his mobility was valuable in that. So the thing that obviously everybody's going to be focused on going forward is the kicking situation. And it's one of those things where you look at it in hindsight and you're going, of course, this would have been something you should have been worried about. This was not a good game for special teams. Obviously, one, you give up the kick return touchdown, you give up an onside kick, but even within the kickoff, which ended up with Dustin Hopkins injured, you can sort of go back and question why you want to try to pin teams down. Like I understand on some level you're trying to get them inside the 25, or you're trying to get them to make a mistake, cause a fumble. Certainly, those are opportunities that can happen. You can have penalties on return team that are certainly seemingly frequent that can put them further back. And I'm not trying to like crush Bubba Ventrone here because I don't, because this isn't something I would have thought about had it not happened. Like, because the Browns had been good enough on kickoff coverages, it doesn't matter. But you do now have to look at this and go risk first reward beyond the points, which are their own element. And certainly, it was very strange that the Browns were up 22-7. And after that interception of Marquise Goodwin, all of a sudden, the Texans were driving a little bit. And there was that one little brief moment where we thought, are they going to make this 22-14 and we're going to be back in another one of these dogfights for no good reason before JOK got the interception? But if you just putting, the kickoff team out there to be at risk, you sort of have to remember that Dustin Hopkins is not a young man. Kickers obviously don't do a whole lot of sprinting in general, but Dustin Hopkins is a 33-year-old kicker. God only knows the last time he's actually tried to do a full speed sprint, but it obviously ends up with a hamstring injury, and you don't foresee that happening. But like here again, like if you want to nitpick and you sort of go back and go, why don't we just kick the ball out of the back of the end zone every time and eliminate this as a potential risk? The points certainly, but then the injury. It's extremely unfortunate because now I believe Dustin Hopkins is 123 points on the season. Jim Brown's record is 126. If he's just healthy enough to finish that game and make all the kicks that the Browns would have had, including that one before the half, without stretching, he easily gets that record. And beyond the record, obviously Dustin Hopkins has been a monstrously important part of this team. Now with a hamstring injury, I can't imagine he's going to be ready to go for Thursday against the Jets. And you're basically fingers crossed, hoping maybe the Bengals, if not then, please by the playoffs. Because all of a sudden you've created this situation. And again, I'm not trying to blame Ventrone. It's just this weird situation that happens. You sort of try to evaluate it. All of a sudden now the Browns have to go find a kicker, at least for a week, and then see where it goes. That's a really troubling situation. Certainly not something you want to have happen. And then obviously later in the game, the punter goes down. It was sore as well. The Browns fortunately didn't have to do much punting in this game, but he gets hurt on a kickoff as the replacement guy, which leads to one of the more endearing moments of this game for me was D'Anthony Bell as the kickoff guy, just squibbing it, because coaches, everybody, they spend countless hours. They don't see their family in a way that becomes borderline psychotic and preparing for every possible angle of a game to try to create an edge, to try to, if I put in, an hour more than the other team, I've got, an hour advantage, whatever, to the point where, it gets to be maddening and I think ultimately counterproductive. And then you have this situation where the Browns could not plan for losing both kicking elements of the game, and then basically being like, oh, I don't know if it came to this, but basically, raise a hand who can kick the ball off the tee. D'Anthony Bell, the second-year undrafted free agent out of West Florida, comes in, squibs the ball, and then he chases it down the field and makes the tackle. And for a game where, so much of it is polished, is buttoned up, is so organized, even if it's not quite as organized as we'd like it to believe, to have this moment where it's just like, ultimately, it was backyard football in some ways, and just just a guy going in there and be like, I can do it and making it work was great. And obviously, D'Anthony Bell, in many ways, sort of exemplifies what this team wants to be. He just plays with a tremendous amount of effort. He plays with guts. He goes hard. It's not always pretty, but he just finds a way to get it done. And that was what that play was. It was just, I'm going to kick the ball off. I'm going to go try to make a tackle. And he did. And they had to have something work there. They improvised. I've heard people compare. I've heard the comparison of Kevin Stefanski to MacGyver. Give him a paper clip, duct tape, and God only knows what else, and he can make it work. D'Anthony Bell was the paperclip in this particular situation, and he just made a play. It was certainly now everybody's going to be sitting there going, what do they do about kicker? But just in that brief window of time, it was like this is a great moment. Defensively, like I said, this was a game where they answered a lot of questions. Can the Browns have a dominant performance on the road? Obviously, they did that against the Arizona Cardinals. It was sort of a weird situation. You had a rookie quarterback in his first ever start. The Arizona Cardinals are not very good. Houston is certainly a better team. Now, granted, it's not CJ Stroud. That makes a world of difference. And the Texans are supremely depleted. They are missing like 4 linemen in like Laramie Tunsil's a stud. Like, he's healthy, he's out there, he's a stud. But they were down a number of guys. They're Kenyon Green, another guy named, another K guy named Kendrick Green, Titus Howard, Jarrett Patterson was their center. He was out. Like, they've had a rough go of it. And so like they're the inverse of the Browns, where they've got the healthy stud tackle, but all their interior is just jumbled up and a mess. And that allowed the Browns to just crush them up the middle. Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris had a really nice day. And then you saw things from like Zadarius Smith. Zadarius Smith was a force all over the field in this one. That he had 2 sacks. He had 4 quarterback hits. He hit the arm of Case Keenum on the Duron Harmon interception. Like, this was the guy that the Browns, that we all hoped the Browns were getting when they traded for him from the Minnesota Vikings. And I think Zadarius Smith has sort of been over criticized, but at the same time, like, I don't think it's entirely unfair given what he showed he could do. This was the game where you're sitting there going, where has this, part of you saying, where has this been all season? And part of you's like, just grateful that it happened. I thought there were a couple of interesting elements with this. For one thing, the injury to Obanya Okoronkwo has caused the Browns to change up some things. So Zadarius Smith is playing on the end more often now, and the Browns are leaning into second-year defensive end Alex Wright, who's playing up and down the line. This has been a great opportunity for him to build on, to get reps, to get more opportunities. He had a really nice play to get the sack, where it seemed like 3 different guys had a chance to block him, and he got through all of them before he got to Keenum to make the sack. With Wright and Smith, traditionally, when the Browns got into rush packages, when they had their guys, Garrett and Okoronkwo were on the edges, and Zadarius Smith was on the interior rushing one of the B gaps. Now all of a sudden you have Zadarius Smith playing all over the line a little bit more frequently, and it may not be that big of a difference. Maybe I'm just paying attention to it more because the Browns have different people out there. They had such a defined rotation for so much of the season that you didn't really notice it much. And usually I'm watching Myles Garrett just to see what he does because he's that dude. But watching this game, you saw Zadarius Smith and Alex Wright sort of mixed up with their alignments all over the place. Like, Alex Wright would be lined up inside with Zadarius Smith on the outside. Alex Wright would be over the tackle, with JOK blitzing inside of him, with Zadarius Smith on one of the edges, Zadarius Smith inside, Alex Wright outside. They ran some stunts like that where those two were next to each other. And, Jim Schwartz historically is like sort of known for having these bigger longer defensive ends where they're so interchangeable that you see that with what they're doing with Alex Wright and Zadarius Smith. And I'm curious to, I would love to ask, and get an honest answer if he prefers the way he's doing it now or if he likes what he has. Because I don't expect him to be like, no, I don't want get Okoronkwo out of here. I don't want him on my team. I think he really likes having it, but there's a certain amount of creative freedom that sort of it becomes necessary with what they have left. And maybe he's more than happy to just be like, no, I prefer to have guys sort of in more defined roles. Whereas this game, you saw Myles Garrett move over, swap sides quite a bit. These two were moving all over. It was sort of an interesting dynamic that had a lot of success. Now, some of that may be a product of the Houston Texans not being very good and having, really poor quarterback play. But it was an interesting dynamic to watch, and I'll be curious to see how that continues. Certainly, that was something that you saw against the Bears a little bit. Basically, since Okoronkwo has gone out with the pec injury against the Jags, this has been sort of their next move. And they've got 2 more games left in the playoffs. I know Okoronkwo desperately wants to come back and play through the torn pec. It's another situation where you admire him endlessly for what he's doing, but there's just this part of you just wants to be just shut it down. I get it. Just shut it down, get the surgery. If that's what has to happen, I can't imagine it wouldn't. And just be done with it. So you can get as healthy as possible for next season. And I get it. There's this element of, the players are no different than the fans who are sort of caught in this sort of prisoner of the moment. The unbridled enthusiasm of the potential of, they could win the Super Bowl. Because one of the things I've heard talked about, as sort of a bit on radio has been, well, is this season more fun than the 2020 season? And I think invariably you're going to get an incredibly high number of people who are going to say the season's more fun. And part of that is because it's not over yet. Like, they could theoretically win the Super Bowl. You already know how 2020 ended. You obviously the big playoff win in Pittsburgh and everything else. And you had Nick Chubb the whole season and everything with that. With more time, I suspected, and knowing with the outcome of the season, if they don't win the Super Bowl, that may change that. But I think the players, just as much as the fans, or more than the fans in the case of Okoronkwo, just desperately want to do anything possible to somehow come back and win. But I don't see how that's going to be possible for Okoronkwo in a way that's going to be beneficial for him or the team. Obviously, he played through it to finish out the game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is incredible on his part. But yeah, let's just shut it down. But the other part of that is Zadarius Smith plays the game that we all hoped he would play. Hopefully, this is an indication of where he's going, not where that this is just an isolated thing. Because if Zadarius Smith can play at that level across from Myles Garrett, the Browns defense certainly gets more interesting. They now have a really strong 1-2 punch up front on the edges. And obviously they need Myles Garrett to play have a bigger role than he had in this game, which is, I think, part of the reason this game was such an impressive defensive performance. I can't remember the last game where Myles Garrett did not play well and the defense did. And even this year, the Browns have a historic defense, and whether it was the Denver Broncos or the Baltimore Ravens in the first matchup, or either matchup, it just consistently felt as if, as good as this group has been, they were still waiting for Myles Garrett to make the play, Myles Garrett to make the big moment. And like in the case against the Ravens, he would do it, and it still wasn't enough. But this was the game where Myles Garrett was certainly not bad. Myles Garrett was still impactful. He had a really strong game defending the run. He had a couple of big splashes where he just blew up the run. I give credit to the Texans. One, Laramie Tunsil is a really good tackle, and the Texans used extra guys to help. And I think Bobby Slowick, their offensive coordinator, who's a really good young coordinator, did a really good job of marrying their blocking scheme to deal with Myles Garrett with their play calling. In other words, when they didn't have extra help on Myles Garrett is because the ball was like being run up the middle or the other side in a way that wasn't going to allow Garrett to sort of chase it down from behind. And then when they did have to have extra attention over there, it was there. That was sort of one of the dynamics was curious to see how it play out in the game, because I thought if the Texans were still providing extra help on Myles Garrett, that would create a circumstance in which the rest of the defensive line had to come up big, and they did. Meanwhile, if they were content to allow Laramie Tunsil to just single block Myles Garrett the entire game, that would have potentially allowed extra help elsewhere. Ultimately, the Texans, more often than not, went with the extra help, went with the extra bodies, and that created a situation where the other guys got a lot of one-on-one matchups, a lot of matchups where they were just better, and it allowed them to just have pressure all day. The Browns only got 3 sacks, and I think had like half a dozen quarterback hits. It felt like it was so much more than that. Obviously, the 1 sack that Zadarius Smith got was ruled off by a penalty. He would have to wait, later in that drive to get another one. So it sort of worked itself out. But like, it felt as if both Texans quarterbacks, Case Keenum and the other one, were consistently under duress, and particularly up the middle. But like I said, Zadarius Smith got 1 sack coming off the right side. This was a case where Case Keenum just sort of ran away from his protection, and Laramie Tunsil was like blocking where he thought he was, had no idea where he was. Zadarius Smith gets off the block, goes to make the play. He got the deflection off of Case Keenum's arm that resulted in Deron Harmon's interception, rushing off the left side. I think he had more pressures, more disruption from the interior. It just allowed this game plan sort of allowed him to just wreak havoc from all over the line. And I am really excited to see more and more of where Alex Wright is going. Obviously, when they drafted him as a 3rd-round pick out of UAB, he was raw, incredibly raw. He's just this massive body and athlete that just hadn't gotten a whole lot of great direction at UAB. And that's not to savage UAB. I mean, they had this guy and they just sort of used him in a way that would be the best for them. I mean, that's sort of, ultimately you are doing what's best for your program in the moment. So you had Alex Wright do things like stand up as this gigantic man end, 6'5" and change, standing up, rushing off the edge, as opposed to becoming a more polished, get off the line from a 3-point and do some of the things like that. And he could win at UAB doing things where he just win with athleticism or just work his way around, where now he has to use far more technique. And you're starting to see that work develop, and you're starting to see him figure things out as a pass rusher. And certainly that sack is a good indication. He's just a super young kid that has a chance to become a really big player going forward. I've seen some people talk about him as a potential starter for next year. I don't know that I'm certainly not going to say that's misguided by any stretch. I would love to have Zadarius Smith back. We'll see what the contract demands are, and if that works, if he's going to get, $10 million somewhere else, the Browns are not going to win that battle. They're not going to be able to resign him. But let's say there's a more reasonably priced defensive end. Danico Autry stands out as a potential option in that, who played for the Tennessee Titans. Jim Schwartz is very familiar with them. Jim Schwartz, who also tried to put in a waiver claim for Tierre Tart, who was released by the Titans. I don't want to say that Alex Wright can't start next year. My inclination at this point is I would feel way better about him if there was another veteran there to sort of help with that. Obviously, you still got Okoronkwo. He will be back. But if it's a guy like if Denico Autry becomes the cost efficient option to give you one more veteran, obviously, look, you can't have too many pass rushers. I say this as right now, I'm advocating that I would love to see the Browns be able to sign Justin Houston off the street. That is my way of being able to say, shut down Okoronkwo, worry about getting the surgery. Justin Houston is a free agent. God only knows what he's interested in, but he's literally just a situational pass rusher who still gets off the ball and still creates problems. That could be a value for the Browns if he's willing to come to Cleveland and willing to the price is right. There are people who keep throwing around names like an Ndamukong Suh or whatever. I don't love that idea, but I do like the idea of getting a guy like Justin Houston. Just continue to rush the passer, continue to give yourself options and how to do that. So if it's a Denico Autry who's suddenly a cost-efficient option in the offseason, I think that would be your best bet. In addition to the fact that you just got to be worried about, depth and injury. And obviously they've got other guys. They've got Isaiah McGuire, who was notably inactive this game in favor of Sam Kamara. I look at McGuire and Siaki Ika both as very raw players who are not yet NFL bodies. They have a lot of work to do, and it's difficult when you're a defensive lineman. But I think both of them have a lot of work to do. They are, the furthest behind in terms of their development. I had obviously questions with Siaki Ika coming out of college. I understand the appeal, and if he can become a true NFL body and a true NFL, bring NFL strength, he has some intriguing qualities that could allow him to be super successful. Right now, when I watch him, he seems like he's desperately leaning into guys because he doesn't believe he has the strength to do it, which is sort of putting him off balance, and he ends up on the ground. Isaiah McGuire had sort of an inauspicious game against the Bears, which may or may not have prompted the Kamara move. I'm certainly not sitting here going, these guys suck and they can't be anything. I just trying to be realistic. I think they're both, at least an offseason away and potentially longer than that, which is all the more reason to get another veteran in here and just continue to give more help. And I think with Denico Autry type, he's another guy, which again, this is sort of my sort of image of what I think is Jim Short's preferences. I think Denico Autry is another guy who can play up and down the line. Another guy, he's older, he's 33, which, that's its own question, but he's also 6'5", listed, and 265 pounds, which sort of fits in that range of guys that the Browns have. You can put them up and down the line. You can mix them up. You can try to find the best matchups and do those things, which is something Za'Darius Smith was obviously good for. That's another reason where I think that could be an appealing fit, but we shall see. I am excited to see Alex Wright, arrow pointing up. Good stuff from him. Saw a strong game from Shelby Harris. Certainly a guy that has, because of the injuries, like with losing Mo Hurst, he's had to play a larger amount of snaps, and he's just stout. He just does his job. He had the big tip that led to JOK's interception. He's just a disruptive player that just does good things for you. And the Browns can't have enough of those guys. So, he's another guy where we'll see what happens in the offseason, but you're sort of hoping that he can become, maybe there's a way that he can come back on another deal, but we'll see. In the secondary, Martin Emerson, forgettable game for him in a lot of ways. Very grabby performance by him, but in some ways was like smart in the fact that like he got called for a couple illegal contact penalties, but like they were 5 yards as opposed to 1, getting beat, or 2, pass interference where it's spot of the ball. I mean, if you're going to get a penalty, illegal contact is the way to go. Now, the flip side of that is it's not great that he was beat twice, sort of flat-footed and had to grab on, but like that was smart in the moment to sort of grab onto him. Obviously, he left the game with a shin injury. I think he's supposed to be fine, but it was weird that they ruled him out with the shin. that may have been a product of just being like, we've got enough guys. But even then, it was weird that they didn't just say questionable. But he continues to be an emerging player, somebody who's getting better and better and better. However, I still think he's largely, he's a guy who's there to guard bigger body receivers. I still don't love him against smaller guys. I still don't love him against super quick guys. It's just a really difficult matchup for a corner with his length and size at that position. Guys with those kind of quicks, if you make one false move, that can get you beat. I think Greg Newsome has played better in recent weeks. His tackling is still hit or miss. Although I give him a ton of credit for the one play he made in this game where they went quick scream to Nico Collins and Greg Newsome just killed the block in front of him. It was a shame because nobody was there to make the tackle in the backfield. They did stop it and force the punt, but like that was a big boy play from Greg Newsome where he just got under the guy's pads and just drove him back straight into the ball carrier. I think he's, Greg Newsome sort of in a weird spot because, depending on the injury situation, he's playing inside, outside. I think he's getting better. I think he's starting to get a little bit more consistent. Obviously that's going to be the big question is when, the Browns obviously struggled when they played Matthew Stafford and Russell Wilson. Those are veteran quarterbacks who know quite a bit, as opposed to playing, Trevor Lawrence is certainly a talented quarterback, but he's just not been very smart this year throughout the season. Even if they had CJ Stroud, it would have been a rookie quarterback, and certainly that would have been a really compelling matchup to see how the CJ Stroud would have played against the secondary. Instead, you get Keenum and Davis Mills. But the Browns have sort of been lucky in the sense that they are doing what they're supposed to do. They're also playing this run of sort of journeymen or young quarterbacks who don't really know a whole lot. They're going to play, God only knows who for the Jets. They've cycled through so many quarterbacks. Trevor Siemian, I think, finished that game. Who knows who they're going to have out there on Thursday? And then you're going to go back to a Bengals backup on the road to finish out the Week 18. Jake Browning, who was, I wouldn't say exposed necessarily, but just when they played against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he got fooled quite a bit with what they were showing him defensively. So that's another situation where you're probably not going to get a great test. And so as a result, you're not going to get a great test of this secondary until you get to the playoffs, and who knows, depending on how that goes. But it's sort of this unanswered question of how the Browns are going to be able to do again when they are faced with a smart veteran quarterback. Obviously, they have, they played well against Lamar Jackson to win that game, but even then, it was both teams scored in the 30s. They lose to the Broncos, they lose to the Rams. So that's sort of one of those things I'm looking forward. Having said that, Ronnie Hickman, man, that guy's just been rock solid for the Browns at free safety. I this is the third week in a row where I'm sitting here and I cannot believe that I'm, at no point are we sitting here going, well, Ronnie Hickman gave up a play because the Browns finally got exposed for having an undrafted rookie safety in the middle. It just hasn't happened. You would think that would be like the way opponents are trying to attack the Browns defense, and they really haven't. I mean, the most of Ronnie Hickman has been, can he secure the tackle in the run game? And there are times where that looks a little sketchy, but ultimately gets the job done. But like nobody's trying to take shots down the deep middle of the field. Nobody's trying to really move him in a way that, exploits him as being an unprepared rookie in the way that you would think. Whether he's just that good or teams are just that averse to doing that. That's just not who they are. It's been a fascinating element that, you talk about this Browns draft class and everything they've been able to do. We've seen DeJuan Jones obviously recovering from knee surgery, but he was a stud. You've seen DTR a little bit, certainly nothing conclusive on him. I'm a fan. I like what I see from him. I think he's going to be a very nice backup with potential. Who knows where that's going to end up. I don't know if he'll ever start, but I think he will be a really good backup. You've seen Cameron Mitchell play well as an undrafted rookie corner. You've seen, I already mentioned Ika, and I've already mentioned McGuire. You're seeing Cedric Tillman on the offensive side of the ball get more and more opportunities and reward the Browns for it as a pass catcher. And then after the catch, some of the stuff he's starting to do there with his strength and stuff like that. And then you've seen, you've seen a little bit of Luke Whippler, just a dash of Luke Whippler, which is probably about right. But to then get additional impact from that rookie class in the form of Ronnie Hickman, and they've got a number of undrafted free agents sort of on their practice squad. Lonnie Phelps, Charlie Thomas III, who's been up the past couple of games as a special teams guy. Tanner McAllister was up for special teams. He's an undrafted rookie. That they just really got a lot of good value. Potentially, obviously, it's very early and things could go very badly, from here. But the early returns from this rookie class have been super promising, despite the fact the Browns didn't have a first or second round pick. Ronnie Hickman has been just a delight so far this year, and it's unclear what are we looking at in terms of the return of Juan Thornhill or Grant Delpit. I mean, Grant Delpit is projected to be back for the playoffs, but Juan Thornhill was not placed on IR. He's just sort of out there and has not practiced with a calf injury. There's been no real update on his status. And that's unfortunate. I mean, you want to have Juan Thornhill back, but at the same time, like Ronnie Hickman is held the thing down. So like the part about Juan Thornhill being back is so you then want Thornhill back so that both he and Hickman can be on the field. The Browns will use some 3 safety looks. Certainly they've used less of them as they've gotten more and more depleted, but they've used 3 different safeties in this game. They used Hickman, they used DeAnthony Bell, and they used Duron Harmon all in this game. But if there's a world where Grant Delpit, Juan Thornhill are both healthy and they have Ronnie Hickman, they can do some stuff with how they want to play it. Maybe they leave Hickman at free and can use Juan Thornhill as sort of a wild card coverage option. He has corner speed and skills. I don't know. Obviously, not going to try to lock him up on a team number 1 receiver or anything like that, but he may be able to contribute in ways that maybe you didn't expect, or it just becomes, hey, it's 3rd and 10. We want Grant Delpit up as sort of a linebacker or a slot position, and we want to split the field between Juan Thornhill and Hickman, on the back end, which is certainly a tantalizing option. So that part is interesting going forward. The Kevin Stefanski element of this, I believe that as of this moment, and this is subject to change because the Browns have a number of 8 and 7 teams that they've beaten. I think the Browns have beaten 7 teams now with a winning record. Now that they've beaten the Texans, but we get into this coach of the year's argument and everything else, and I suspect Kevin Stefanski won't win it just because he won it in 2020. But I find it hard to find somebody else more deserving of the award. Now, the Browns have 10 wins with 2 games to go. 5 of those wins are against other people who have been mentioned for Coach of the Year. Zach Taylor of the Bengals, the Browns thumped week 1, and we'll get a chance to play again. And if they sweep them, Zach Taylor and the Bengals will be 0-6 in the AFC North. They beat Kyle Shanahan, And they did it with PJ Walker at quarterback, which is, again, unfathomable. I was watching the Denver Broncos game against the New England Patriots, and I was sitting there thinking, man, I would love a do-over with the Broncos. Obviously, not having Cortland Sutton was a very big deal for them, but they looked rough. And you're sitting there going, man, how did they lose this game in Denver? At the same time, I'm sure the 49ers fans are saying the same thing about how the hell did we lose to the Browns with PJ Walker quarterback? But they did it, and they did it with Walker. So that's another Coach of the Year candidate. They beat Shane Steichen with PJ Walker at quarterback and Myles Garrett just destroying everything in that game. And yes, there are people who are like, well, they shouldn't have won that game and all this and the other. And that's fine. But here I will also look at the Ravens game against the Rams in overtime, where one of the most obvious clips was not called, and they win the game on the punt return touchdown. So it is what it is. Were all the Colts calls necessarily great? Maybe not, but the one was definitely the most pivotal one was certainly a penalty in which the receiver was immediately hooked off the line of scrimmage. But whatever. They beat Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen's a hell of a coach. Unfortunately, they lost to the Falcons, and it's a very weird loss. They're 8-7. I think Shane Steichen's done a hell of a job. He's a spectacular play caller and designer of offense. I think that team's got a very bright future with him as the coach. They beat the Browns beat Houston Texans, obviously. I think if D'Amico Ryans had won that game, he would have been the lock. They were 13-1 last year. In fact, I went back and listened to a podcast for the sake of talking about Andrew Berry and talking about how Kevin Stefanski enjoys going to work every day. And people were like, well, he should be worried about his job or whatever. And I was talking about how that's not the mentality. And I said he should be thrilled. At least he's not in Houston, where they have a number of problems to solve. And D'Amico Ryans has solved a lot of them. He's done such a great job for that team. Certainly that team is flawed. Certainly that team has a lot of holes to still fill. The AFC South is not a very good division, but if you get into the playoffs in the AFC in this field, you've earned it. It's a bloodbath this year. So with that, the Browns have beaten. Oh, and the Browns beat John Harbaugh. I mean, the Browns obviously the Browns split those games with the Ravens, but the Ravens beat the Browns at home, and the Browns beat the Ravens. They won on each other's field. So the Browns came back from a 14-point deficit to beat the Ravens in Baltimore. So that's another potential Coach of the Year candidate. So 5 in all, that's half their wins. And again, they've got 2 other wins against teams with winning records, which may or may not last. Houston, the Colts, the Bengals, the Steelers are all 8-7. They could all end up being 500. They could all theoretically end up below 500 before the season's over. But here at this moment, the Browns have beaten nothing but teams that are above 500 and a whole lot of playoff caliber teams. And the way the Browns have won, certainly people are going to talk about Browns defense and how important that's been. And yes, critical component. And Jim Schwartz has done a tremendous job with the unit he has. I think the past couple of weeks have been arguably more impressive just in terms of the pieces, parts they've been able to move in and out of the lineup and done well. Like I said, being able to have Ronnie Hickman come in and play at a high level is extraordinary to me. And that's been how they've been able to operate these last 3 weeks. And the defense has played at a really high clip. And again, I know they're not great opponents. Houston should have been, but obviously injuries impacted that game. The Jacksonville Jaguars was a legit win. And then the Bears are a bad team, but they were 3-1 heading into that game. Fine. The nature of the injuries the Browns have faced have sort of made every game a dogfight in sort of going in and thinking about the game, even if the Bears and Texans games were games you felt like they probably should win given the circumstances. But Kevin Stefanski, 1, gets credit for hiring Jim Schwartz, and 2, he is still the head coach. And 3, as we've learned from listening to Myles Garrett and some of these other guys, Kevin Stefanski is more present on defense than people think he is. The defensive guys have given him a lot of credit in terms of head coaching, but like Myles Garrett talked about, him asking him what the defense wants to do, and trying to lean into some of the things they were doing in terms of their game plan and stuff. So look, Kevin Stefanski's always going to be an offensive guy in terms of that's where he is. That's what he does. He's the play caller. But in the same way that you don't immediately think you don't invalidate Brian Billick for the Ravens 2000 season when they won the Super Bowl, you can't invalidate Kevin Stefanski entirely because he's an offensive coach. And then, let's talk about the offense and all the buttons they've pushed that have worked, using incredibly weird packages, getting you mentioned that, I mentioned the San Francisco game. I still can't believe they got a 16-yard touchdown on that toss to Kareem Hunt in the red zone, like where the 49ers are completely just outmaneuvered, and Kareem Hunt is untouched for 16 yards, which is difficult to think about given how slow he is. That was able to work like that. Like, they keep pushing these buttons and getting things to work. They get contributions from guys you don't expect. David Bell's touchdowns against the Jacksonville Jaguars, Cedric Tillman becoming a bigger part of the offense. They've gone through 13 different linemen at this point. They've gotten contributions from Harrison Bryant. They've gotten big plays. And now, that they push the Flacco button, you're starting to see you're seeing the Browns, the guys we think is superstars look like superstars, or the guys we'd like to be offensive superstars look like superstars. And that is a credit to Flacco and what he's able to do. And certainly Stefanski and everything they've been able to do. David Njoku's sort of been building to this. Amari Cooper's just been rock solid for the 32 games he's been here. The 265 yards is incredible, but every game this year where he's over 100 yards, they've won. When he gets the ball, good things tend to happen. And with all the chaos that side of the ball has endured, he's been the one guy that stayed in place the whole way, and the one guy who's been consistently good. That there's no other position on this team where you can say that. The line has gone through so many different guys. The receivers have had so many different guys. Obviously Amari Cooper leaving the Rams game had an impact on that one. Even if the Browns had a shot and Elijah Moore was able to shine in that moment, he has been their true north of sorts, their North Star in terms of where the offense goes. They follow the North Star with Amari Cooper. Good things tend to happen. And in matchups, any matchup where you're looking at the Browns, whether it's the Jets and obviously Sauce Gardner coming this week, or the Bengals, or into the postseason, one of the biggest things is going to be, how does the opponent account for Amari Cooper, because he's been that important of a player. But all of this would suggest to me that Kevin Stefanski's deserving of the Coach of the Year award. And if he doesn't get it, it's whatever. Obviously, he got the one in 2020. There were a lot of things that went into that. The fact that the Browns were 11-5 and then won a playoff game on the road. The Browns hadn't won a playoff game since the 90s. The Browns hadn't done any number of things until Kevin Stefanski got there. That was certainly baked into what they'd done, to that decision. Look, I mean, Kevin Stefanski in a lot of ways has sort of, along with Andrew Berry, because Andrew Berry is certainly a critical component in this, and everybody else in that front office, has fixed the Browns in a way that, did not appear to be doable the past 30 years with ownership and everything else. Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry have made the Browns a desirable organization. People are looking at them. I mean, we're literally looking at Kevin Stefanski, and we're seeing other teams talk about, why can't our head coach be more like Kevin Stefanski? Why can't our GM be more like Andrew Berry? And between everything they've got going on there, you've got coaches being hired out of the Browns organization, like this past year with Drew Petzing being hired as the offensive coordinator for the Arizona Cardinals. You've seen multiple GMs You've seen a GM hired out of this. You're going to see two more hired out of this organization, like the Browns are. They may not be there's no sense competing in terms of the best organization. The fact that the Browns are a good organization, they are one of the teams, one of the organizations teams are looking at and going, wow, what are they doing? Is an unbelievable achievement. All of that impacted Kevin Stefanski getting that first 2020 Coach of the Year award, and as did the pandemic. I mean, the fact that you had every rookie coach was at a disadvantage that year because you couldn't prepare with your team. They had to do all that stuff in terms of through screens and all the other things that were like guys were training at home, and they had to sort of try to communicate and coach with these guys and figure it out around all these things, whereas that inherently favored veteran teams who sort of knew who they were. They weren't trying to install a new offense, new defense, and everything else. They had that sort of born-in advantage. The Browns did not, and Kevin Stefanski did not, and they managed to maneuver that. That's part of the reason that they deserve a ton of credit for it. That's part of the reason that that was such a monumental achievement, even as people then would try to use that as a way to sort of deride Kevin Stefanski in some ways, because there weren't fans in the stands, as if that was the problem. And obviously there were some things that I know Brees talked about this, and we've talked about this in the podcast, that like there was some element of maybe guys not being able to leave the facility kind of worked out for the Browns in some cases. And then I guarantee that played a role. That certainly helps. Nevertheless, I think what Kevin Stefanski has done with this team is extraordinary. They are 10-5, which again is unbelievable to think of. 3 weeks ago, the Browns were 7-5, and we're sitting, had lost the 2 games on the road. You're sitting there going, is this team going to fall apart? Is this when it happens? This inevitable slide, and all of a sudden, the Browns have this new life. And undoubtedly, a big part of that is Joe Flacco. Even if he plays the averageness of those first three games, he does bring out a certain level of belief in that anything is possible. As I've mentioned, he does allow people to sort of dream a little bit in terms of what is possible, because it's the difference between, God bless DTR, the game they won against the Steelers. He wasn't really allowed to do anything. You're sitting there with, in some ways, you are simultaneously in this mode where you're sitting there going, please don't turn over the ball, while also being like, hey, maybe good things can happen, as opposed to when it was DTR or PJ Walker, particularly DTR in that Steelers game, it felt like he was stealing. And they just had to hold on to the victory. And again, I look at the Broncos game and I thought DTR got much better, which is why I think DTR's got a bright future. But there's no denying that, like, you were white knuckling that Steelers win in a way that obviously the Browns didn't yesterday, even if it got weird late. And in some ways it wasn't, the Jacksonville game, same way. It's just a little bit different when you have the ability to move the ball the way you do. And then obviously, look, this game showed you what Joe Flacco was capable. And now, because you had this game, you've got this thing where you can hang out there and sort of look at this and go, well, if Joe Flacco gets hot for X games, the Browns, anything can happen, and they could win the Super Bowl, which is certainly a fun aspect of this element that you have to enjoy. You have to be able to sit here and just be able to enjoy the ride. And I've been trying to do that the whole season. Like, obviously, with the injuries, you sort of, on the one hand, you were resigned to your fate in the sense of there was a end point, but you were still sitting there going, man, I hope they can do X, Y, and Z. For me, it was 1, get in the playoffs, and then 2, it was win the division, because the Browns haven't done that since 1989. But the other part of that was just a testament to everything this team has been doing. But now, as they've gotten to 10-5, and you watch some of these other teams, and you watch some of these other, the week-to-week nature of the NFL and how teams rise and fall so quickly, you just never know. I still have a sneaking suspicion that the Browns, assuming they don't somehow get the division is still a possibility. The Browns could still get there, but I suspect if the Browns will go until they are forced to play a game on the road. That's a playoff game on the road is where I feel like this journey may end. And now I would love to be wrong, and people can dunk on me for saying, but look, if there is a small chance the Browns could end up with a 1 seed, which would be pretty much automatic to the Super Bowl, wouldn't it? I mean, that is the dream. Browns. Kevin Stefanski is winning at like 70% of his games at home. The Browns are 7-1 at home this year. Uh, if they get home field advantage, you have to feel really good about their chances. The road is where the things get murky, and you'll see what happens. But that is the thing. We'll see what happens. And Joe Flacco, if there's a way for him to sort of bottle up what he had in this game and get it going, that's great. Obviously, the fear is that, again, some of this came down to the fact that the Texans were missing Will Anderson and Jonathan Greenard. That's, I think, almost 20 sacks between them this year. That was a devastating loss for them. It's not quite when the Browns were down Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney, but it's not far off. So we shall see. 1 week at a time. Go want to know this Thursday. I continue to be floored by what this team is capable of, and it's been just a tremendous ride, regardless of where it ends up. This season has been exciting for all the same reasons. It's been heart-wrenching. The amount of adversity this team has had to endure, the amount of injuries and everything else, were like heartbreaking to see some of these guys go down. You know, Nick Chubb and Jack Conklin and any number of players are sitting there going, you know, it's just such a gut punch to watch these guys go down, and yet they continue to win. They continue to endure, and it's not difficult to see a path where the Browns are 12-5 at the end of this, which is just unthinkable. Would have been unthinkable coming into the season had you been able to know ahead of time that Joe Flacco was going to be your quarterback, that Jerome Ford was going to be a running back, that they had Jaron Christian and James Hudson III as your tackles, Taverani Hickman as your free safety. That is just extraordinary achievement for this team. So I'm going to I mean, there's no reason I should have another podcast up for after the Thursday's game. We'll see what happens with that. Obviously, the quick turnaround is really tough, even though the Browns are at home. You know, my feeling on Thursday night games, I hate this stuff. I think it's horrible for the sport to try to play, turn around and play on 4 days rest, or just 4 days. You're basically saying, screw practice. We're just going to rest up and roll the ball out there and see what happens, which is just a disingenuous representation of what the sport is to me. But it is what it is. The good news is, if they can get a win against the Jets, they get a week and a half to prepare for the Bengals. And depending on where things fall, who knows what they'll do. They may, if we're going to have a discussion about resting guys, if it's going to be something like that. But a week and a half at this point in the season, with the Browns preparing for the postseason, that will be incredibly valuable, and that will be something that will be worth that. Could be worth whatever they have to endure Thursday to get that week and a half. I can't imagine how excited the Browns are for that. So anyway, potential to be 11-5 this week. Potential to control, not just make the playoffs, but to storm into the postseason by securing a spot with a win. And to match obviously match the same number of wins they had the last time they were in the postseason. Look, it's certainly incredible to think that this team could be have the same number of wins that teams did, considering everything this team has had to endure. But I will be interested to see what the environment is Thursday when the Jets come to Cleveland. I expect it's going to be a huge crowd, loud crowd, and just trying to take that thing over and just provide the most ridiculous home field advantage ever, as this team is just completely lost in this, Browns fever, however you want to describe it, in a way that, man, between this 2020 to 2018, when Baker Mayfield was like a rookie, man, those we're at that point with people just everybody's in it. People who don't care about football seem to care about the Browns right now, which in this area, which is something that is always fun to see. The fact that everybody's on board with this thing. Anyway, you can find my work over at the OBR. You can support the show, like, subscribe, tell a friend, comment, all those things. And yeah, I will be back next week. And then Bree should be back as we get ready for the playoffs, because she's a front runner. Anyway, hopefully everybody's having a Merry Christmas and any other holidays that you might celebrate, Hanukkah, and anything else. Festival of Saturnalia is kind of a big deal about this time. So, but other than that, well, I'll be back next week, and hopefully we're talking about another Browns win, and would be the longest winning streak of the season if they can get this one at 4 games. They could finish out with a 5-game winning streak going into the postseason, which would be great.